Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Trey Grayson. I'm the director of the Institute of Politics. I'm really glad to have all of you here with us at the Harvard Kennedy School. We've been very fortunate this semester to have a great resident fellow, Ana Navarro, who will introduce our outstanding visiting fellow who's been all over campus this week, and we're really glad to have had him. I asked him if he was worn out, and he said, not even close. So he's having a great time, but tonight we're really honored to have both of them in the forum. Ana Navarro is going to interview the mayor. Ana is a Republican strategist, a CNN commentator, and is originally from Miami, Florida. And so we've been really glad to have her. So please join me in welcoming IOP fellow Ana Navarro. Ana.
Well, this is frankly an unexpected treat for me, because not only do I admire Mayor Villaraigosa, but we're also good friends. And so the drawback to that is that I'm going to be asking him questions that I know a lot of the answers to, and he's going to have to say the truth, and nothing but the truth. He now says he's got 7 staffers here that he can see. So
There are 7 people that have worked for me over the years. It's just amazing. I mean, that I bumped into. I assume there'd be more than 7 of them.
Well, let's get this started. So a little bit about Mayor Villaraigosa. He was the 41st mayor of Los Angeles, but he's gone through quite a metamorphosis and transformation. He started in the farm worker movement. He was president of the ACLU. He was Speaker of the House. He was chairman of the Democrat Party in California. He was also, lastly, the chair of the Democrat Convention. And now he's a visiting fellow at Harvard. So I think he's got quite a lot of accomplishments. So let's start by asking that question. Who is Antonio Villaraigosa? How did he become mayor? And how do you think you've evolved through the years?
There we go. Well, it has to, my grandpa got here 100 years ago from Mexico, from León, Guanajuato. Came here with a shirt on his back, worked in the fields, built a small produce business in the teens. By the 1920s, had a fairly successful business that gave him a middle-class life. My mom was at a Catholic boarding home, the top Catholic boarding home in LA. Lost all his money in the Depression, lost his wife, put my mother in a foster home in Catholic school, visited her on the weekends. Part of the greatest generation, and I always say I'm here because of my mom and my grandpa, who gave me an opportunity, because we live in a great country that gave me a shot, and because, God is good, and I was very fortunate to have a family that had a strong faith to them. So that's who I am. I am the product of my mother's love.
Now, I've seen a political evolution in you. When you first came out as a Latino leader to watch, first of all, that's what you were called then, a Latino leader. I think now you're still a Latino leader. You will always be proud to be Latino, but you have transcended just that. You are a leader, period. How would you respond to that?
It's funny because I just shared with you a little of the background. I was born here. My mother was born here. My grandpa got here 100 years ago. And yet, as you said, I was oftentimes described in the way that you did. I grew up in an English-speaking home. I'm the son of an immigrant on my father's side, but he left when I was 5. So my experience was very, Mexican-American, very like Irish-American, Jewish or Greek-Americans. It was very, particularly in the time that I was, growing up, it was everybody wanted to be, kind of mainstream and homogenized. So I took umbrage from time to time with that characterization because, I was born here. I started out, though, interestingly enough, at 15. I tell people I never worked in the fields. I wasn't a farm worker. I didn't speak, a word of Spanish. I kind of understood I had to stand up for them, so I first got involved in the farm worker boycott against grapes. I can't tell you I totally understood why, but over the years I think it had something to do with, I realized I had an education. I had to speak out for people who couldn't. I became a student leader. I played football, not very well, by the way, but I hung around with African American. I was a a running back and a linebacker. Hung around with African American football players, and it was during the civil rights movement, and they started the Black Student Union, and I said, I want to join, and I did, and then the United Mexican American Students, and then, just led the walkouts that we had back then.
Wait, you joined the Black Student Union movement? Okay.
Yeah, and by the time I got to UCLA, Bruin. By the time I got to UCLA, I certainly transcended that in my politics. I worked across, racial and ethnic lines, and a great deal of issues at the time. There was the bombing of Cambodia and Laos, and there was affirmative action fights, and I was in the middle of all of that, and leading a very multiracial group. I was a labor organizer after that in a union that was probably 70% African American. I worked at the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission enforcing our nation's discrimination laws, and became a steward and chief steward and president of a 5-state local at 25, and ran for national president at 27 and lost by 7 votes. And I've always been kind of a coalition builder, frankly. And so I took umbrage from time to time that I was described in the way that you mentioned, because it wasn't necessarily my experience, and it certainly wasn't my politics. My politics were more coalition-based.
You began your political career as maybe you disagree with this, but I think from the other side we saw you as a liberal firebrand. You just described from the farm worker unions you were, but today I know that you have a number of Republican friends. You are a person who, in a world that's so polarized and where there's so much lack of civility in politics, deals with a lot of civility and have always performed your duty with a lot of civility. How did that transformation happen?
Again, I attribute much of who I am to my mom. We respected people, and as an example, I did come from that side of the ledger, as you mentioned. I was president of the ACLU, but the ACLU is an example. We believe in the battle of ideas. We used to debate, very often and heatedly. And I've always had a respect for people with different ideas. Now, you're right. When I got elected in 1994, I was majority whip within a few days of being elected, and I was the Democratic firebrand. I was the one that would get up on the floor of the legislature and excoriate the other side. I asked the Republican leader at the time, and he's now the chairman of the Republican Party, and Jim Brulti, I asked him, why do people hate me so much? And he said, why do the Republicans hate me so much? And he said, well, he says, you get up and you personalize things. And I think I had gotten away from that civility that I was raised with. And I realized that if I was going to communicate effectively, and more importantly, if I was going to get things done, that I was going to have to tone down the rhetoric and respect other people's views. And I think it was since that time that I got back to the roots, if you will, and understood that, you're best, not when you're screaming, but when you're lowering the volume a bit. In fact, whenever I'm on TV and somebody starts screaming at me, I always lower the volume because I don't want to be a part of that kind of an exchange. So by the time I got elected Speaker of the House, the first thing I did, Democrats used to sit on one side of the aisle and Republicans on the other. I put them together. I actually got called to task by the Republicans went, ballistic, and the Democrats were very unhappy, and they called for a caucus. And they said, we don't want to sit with them. I said, well, that's fine. You will sit with them because maybe if you sit with them, you'll realize that you both had a town hall this weekend. You got screamed at. You had to go to throw, the first pitch at a Little League game. You had problems at the house because you haven't been home all week. And maybe you'll kind of think you have something in common, you could work together. I gave Republicans proportionality of resources, unheard of before or since. I let the Republican leader name every vice chair. And all I said was, I want a budget. They can call me names, and they did. But we need a budget. We got to get, the House has got to do its work. So I think over time, I realized that was a more effective way of getting things done, and really of understanding that you come with your own views, but they're just that. They're your own views.
So you were Speaker of the House in
Yeah.
California. What advice would you give Speaker John Boehner right now?
I loved the institution. I believed, particularly in the assembly when you're speaker, the assembly is the people's house. It's the lower house, it's the bold house, it's the house of innovation, it's the house that moves the agenda. So I loved the institution. I believe he loves the institution as well. And I guess my advice that I would give him is, put the interests of the institution before all else. There were many times that my caucus would take umbrage with things that I would do. They would criticize my reaching out to the other side, and I pushed back. I'll give you an example. Right after Bill and Hillary did their health care initiative, I got elected, so it was 1994. So, most of us on that side, most Democrats felt the easiest way to expand health care would be to expand Medi-Cal. So I did a bill that said, okay, they killed health care for all, let's do it for kids. That's going to be hard to hit. We'll expand health care, Medi-Cal, to 200% above poverty. That's basically single payer. To 200% above poverty. I couldn't get it out of my house the first time. The next year, still majority whip, I put the bill across again. I get it out of the committee, but I couldn't get it out of the House. The year after, the Republican Congress, under Newt Gingrich, and Bill Clinton agreed to what was the CHIP program, that essentially the framework for providing health care for kids, an insurance program. I was on the conference committee. I'm now the majority leader. And there were a few of us who had health care bills, and they were the Democratic version. In other words, they were either some variation of single payer or, either in the Senate or the Assembly. I went to, because I was majority leader, I went to the governor and I said, what's the prospects of getting something done with you? He said, expanding your Medi-Cal bill is dead on arrival. I will veto it. I'm not expanding entitlements. It's dead on arrival. So I said, what will you vote for? What would you sign? He said, I'd sign a health insurance program. I looked at him and I said, I'll give you a health insurance program. So I did. The author of single payer, essentially, for 2 years running, I took it to the Democrats, and they booed me. And all of the interest groups booed me as well and said that we shouldn't consummate that agreement. I went ahead with it. And I pushed it through my caucus, and today, whenever I'm introduced as the author of Healthy Families, 750,000 kids have health care, I get a standing ovation. I learned a lot about, you know, getting things done and compromise, and realized that, you know, like football, you know, when you get the ball, you want to get a first down. You're not trying to get a touchdown at every turn. You want to get a first down. And I wasn't afraid to get a first down. And
Is that
so,
possible is that possible today?
Oh, yeah.
In Washington?
Absolutely.
Do you think both sides can compromise what they have to compromise in order for there to be a grand bargain?
Well, they have to compromise to get a grand bargain, but I don't think either side understands the level of cynicism that's growing, the lack of participation that's resulting from that cynicism, this sense that government doesn't work, that's really kind of spreading throughout the country. And I think that's not healthy for democracy. It's not healthy for either party. And, you know, it takes two to tango, and there's no question that, in my opinion, it's more broken on the right and markedly more broken on the right. It's broken on the left, too. I mean, you know, I tell people with all respect, you know, I'm not a kid on a college campus anymore. I'm a grown-up. I got to, you know.
Oh, you are on a college campus.
I know. But I said, and a great college campus, by the way, and I have a lot of respect for the young people here, but I said, look, I don't see everything in black and white, because it's not black and white. There's gray here. And, you know, particularly at this time, you know, when you start messing with the full faith and credit of the United States of America and put us on the precipice of default and coming razor thin close to destroying the world economy. I mean, every economist said, if we'd have done that, this would have been Lehman Brothers all over again. I mean, I don't get it. So, and while I put more blame, obviously, on the small part of the Republican Party that kind of led it, you know, we came too close. And both parties need to push out, you know, the edges and try to forge a compromise. I mean, you know, with all respect to my friends in the Congress and the Progressive Caucus, who, I guess it was in the Journal 3 days ago, said, over my dead body, Mr. Obama, we won't change CPI for Social Security, even in a grand bargain? Come on. I mean, what planet are you on? Look, by the way, nobody should care about that more, Democrat or Republican, than all of you. The generational equity issue is not a Democratic or Republican issue. It is impacting you. If our Social Security Medicare system, which is taking more and more of our economy, if they go insolvent, or they'll never go insolvent, what it'll mean is more taxes on you and less benefits. That's not what we should do. I mentioned, because you asked the question, how I got here, and, you know, because I had a great grandpa, a grandpa who struggled and, you know, came to this country with nothing and didn't speak the language in the 1900s, when, you know, coming to California or Texas from Mexico wasn't, you know, starting a business, building it, and then a mother who, you know, read Shakespeare to her kids and sacrificed, single mom, raised 4 of us. I mean, you know, I'm here because of the largesse. Most of us work hard so our kids will have a better life. What do we do in California? Pass Prop 13 to protect grandpa, me, grandson, you know, but grandson's got to pay more than we do. I mean, what's wrong with that picture? That's what we're doing when we refuse to tinker around the edges and strengthen Social Security and Medicare. So, you know, I do think it's more broken on the right, and I'll continue to say that, but, you know, I love progressives. They can get as rigid and as orthodox, left to their own devices, as the other side.
Well, talking about broken, you were the CEO of a very large U.S. city. It's bigger than many countries.
19th largest economy in the world.
As the CEO, what would you do if one of your cabinet members had performed the way Secretary Sebelius has performed? What would you do if you hadn't been told that there were glitches, for lack of a better term, in the website? And how do you think the White House, President Obama, should handle what is, I know you were a strong supporter of ACA. I've got to feel you are extremely disappointed, as are some of the supporters. Do you think somebody's head has got to roll?
Well, you're probably talking to the wrong guy, and I'll tell you why. First of all, I don't know that Kathleen Sebelius is the reason for this glitch, but we do need to get to the bottom of it. That's one. Two, you're probably talking to the wrong guy, because I was always the guy, and I have staff here who remember that. It was always my chief of staff that wanted to make heads roll. I was the one always saying, oh, come on, I'm not going to fire her for that. You know, I said that was a mistake. You know, it was one mistake. It wasn't a mistake of volition. You know, I'm not firing him or her. So I did have advisors, particularly chief of staff or my consultants when I was in a campaign, who would say, you know, you got to fire that person. And I was always the one say, well, hold it. What really happened? Did they do this on purpose? Did they lie? Did they? So I was not the right one. I'm not the right one to ask that question. But I do think we need to get to the bottom of that. And yes, I am disappointed. You know, we've been preparing for this for, you know, X number of years, 3 years. They should have got it right, and they didn't. Now, remember, we're talking about the federal exchange. Some of the states are moving ahead, and the biggest reason why we're not insuring people is that so many states, led by Republican governors, won't accept the Medicaid provisions. Having said that, we got to get to the bottom of what happened. People should be held accountable for it. I don't know if it's necessary to fire somebody, but people need to be held accountable, and more importantly, we need to fix it. I spent my time not holding, you know, firing people, but fixing what was broken. Now, staff will tell you what we did. We brought in McKinsey. As soon as I got elected, we brought in McKinsey. We said, the criticism of me is that I said, dream with me, and I had all these campaign promises. I said, so, McKinsey, help us put on a dashboard all the campaign promises and put deadlines, you know, milestones all across. They should have done that with something as important as the Federal Affordable Care Act. You know, you put a dashboard up. What have you done? How have you done it? Have we tried it out? You know, all these things. That didn't happen. And there's no question that as a result, we're losing confidence that, you know, government can work. Kind of like we did when, you know, in the Bush administration, they couldn't respond to Katrina. And so it's not so much at the Democrats or the Republicans, it's just
Heck
like...
of a job, Sebelius.
Well, I won't say that either, because I don't think we, you know, exactly know everything that happened. She'll be testifying next week, as I understand, and hopefully we'll get a better idea of what's going on and what happened.
Let's move to a different topic, something that I know you're passionate about, and that's education. You had some pretty big fights over education during your term as mayor, and something unexpected for a Democrat, certainly, is you took on the teachers' unions on some issues, and they took you on back when it came campaign time. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, to the young women here who worked for me, actually worked on my education agenda. You know, I said when I ran You know, when you buy a home, one of the first things you're going to ask is, what is the neighborhood school like? How are they doing well? You know, real estate prices are connected to, like, the success of a neighborhood public school. So I always say that when you look at great neighborhoods are anchored by great public schools. Great cities have to be anchored by great public schools and institutions of higher learning. That's why Boston's so successful, LA, New York, we have great institutions of higher learning. None of us have great public schools. When Tom Friedman says the world is flat and that we're not competing, he's actually talking about the kids of the middle class and the upper middle class. The kids of the poor aren't competing with the developing world. So I made education priority number one. Now, you mentioned the Latino thing, and one of the things I said was, the role of the first, get over it. I said, I'm the first, I won't be the last. I said, but the role of the first is to open up the door for the rest. It's not to pound on your chest and say how special I am. I said to people whenever I was asked, how did you get here? I can read and write. I can communicate. You know, I took on the issue of public schools because I believed it was the economic issue of our time. We need, an economy predicated on intellectual capital. We need educated people. It's the democracy issue of our time. If you can't read and write, you can't participate as an informed citizenry. It's the civil rights issue of our time. You know, listen, this is a beautiful university, but let's be honest. It doesn't reflect the fact that 50% of the people that are born today come from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. They're not in our universities in the way that they should be. So I took on this issue. And early on, I worked for the teachers union. I'm not anti-teacher.
Are they anti-Villaraigosa?
No. Well, we'll get to that. I understood how hard it was. I know that we're 47th in per pupil spending. But I said, look, then work with me to turn this around. Over the last 8 years, we doubled in a school district where 46% of the kids were graduating. 80% of them were scoring at the bottom 20 percentile. And you correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan. We doubled the number of successful schools at 800 and above, which is what the state says is a successful school. We increased the graduation rate from 46% to 67%. Nothing to brag home to mother about, because every one of them should be graduating and hopefully going on to college or getting a specialized degree. But we moved it. We have more kids in, we built schools. It was the most overcrowded school district in the country, and the reason why that was a problem was because they were on a year-round calendar and they got 16 fewer days a year, the poorest kids, because those were the ones that were overcrowded. They got 16 fewer days a year in a country where our public schools the days aren't long enough, and they're not going to school long enough in the year when compared to other countries. So I said, look, we're all in it. I'm the mayor. I want to partner with you. Went to the legislature. I got permission to partner with the school district to run the schools. I was sued. I lost on constitutional grounds. I went to Plan B. I said I'm going to elect a school board that will support reform and changes and accountability for all of us, including the mayor. I lost. I won repeatedly. And the result is what I just mentioned. We've seen, we got more kids in charters. They're public. Many of them are union. Some of them are union. But more important, we tripled the number of charters, but more importantly, and have more kids in charters than any school district in the country, but more importantly, we increased ninefold the number of charters at 800 and above. Then I said, but I know that's not convincing many of you, so this is what I'll do. I'll take on the toughest, most violent schools in Watts, the East Side, and downtown. Schools like Markham. Markham was a middle school in Los Angeles that had 120 kids, in Watts, 120 kids arrested on campus in 1 year. I took it over. I took it over, and after a year, less than 20 kids were arrested. After the second year, less than 10. We made safety a priority. If we were a school district, in the last 2 years, thanks to the work of these two young women here, our schools would be the most improved in the state 2 years running. We had the most improved high school in the state 2 years running, one of them in Watts. And we pushed an agenda of change and innovation. We gave parents power. I said, I came from unions. I believe in unions. I believe in collective bargaining. I want parents to have one. So we started the parent union. We started the parent revolution, the parent trigger. We started every effort to involve our parents. Then we had a parent college, and we said in the college, and we were tough on our parents too, we held them accountable. We said, look, these are your kids. You know how I got here? My mother set the highest expectations for me. She took the bus to the parent-teacher conference. It's unacceptable that you not come to your kid's school. It's unacceptable that you not involve yourself in their education. My mother sometimes worked 2 jobs. You should too. We created a culture of parent involvement, a culture of empowerment. We said to the teachers, we're going to evaluate you
How involved
based on how effective you are, not just how long you've been on campus. We closed down schools. You know, look, we didn't do that because, you know, there was some animus toward either teachers or the union. We did that because I believe the most important thing we do in this country, we should all be concerned. If all the people that are serving you come from one part of the world, that is not healthy in a democratic society. We got to fix these schools. And it touches all of us because in California, if we don't start graduating kids of color, we're going to be 2.5 million down by 2025 in the number of college graduates or kids with specialized degrees. And it's all because of the achievement gap. So I was willing to take on my friends, as you said, notwithstanding that, you know, it might have had some political costs associated with it, because I'm not going to, because the role of the first is to open up the door for the rest. It's not to say it's okay that in great universities, after the affirmative action proposal in 1998, there was one African American at UC Law School. I said, this isn't Alabama, this isn't Mississippi, this is America. And that was unacceptable. So I feel very strongly about that, and I'll take on my friends over it. And, I hope to collaborate and work with them ultimately, because I think that's the goal for all of us. And I've never said it's just them. It's parents that don't think they have a responsibility for their kids because I'm working hard, because I don't speak that. No, we all have a responsibility. It's politicians who won't challenge this broken paradigm. It's all of us who aren't saying, we've got a stake in someone else's kids. As you can see, I get passionate about this.
I know this is a passionate one for you. In fact, one of the most interesting conversations I've ever listened to is the conversation between Governor Jeb Bush and Mayor Villaraigosa talking about education, and the amount of common thought that was going on in that education, in that conversation, frankly, scared me.
Scared a lot of people.
So I want to open it up to questions, and the rules, as you all know, is identify yourself and your affiliation, make it brief, and make sure it's a question that ends with a question mark, not a speech.
Is this on? Good evening. My name is Juan Salazar. I'm a master's in public policy student here at the Kennedy School, and also the editor-in-chief of the Harvard Journal of Hispanic Policy. So my question for you, and I have to say it's an honor to have you here today as a fellow Californian.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So the question I had for you was, what is your advice for the next generation of Latino leaders, specifically considering the changing demographics of the country. Maybe not just Latino leaders, but leaders that are going to go ahead and represent predominantly Latino communities as you did in Los Angeles.
My advice would be the same that I shared with you. When you get a great education, put it to use, not just for you, but in the service of others. There's too few of us to have the luxury not to give back. I always say to people that when too much is given, much is expected and required. You all are getting an education second to none. Give back. Help others. The other thing I'd say is don't limit yourself. Maybe because of my own circumstances, I never walked in a room and, kind of said, I'm the only one. I kind of walked in the room, felt like I owned it. And own it. Don't let others put you in a box. Break out of the box. President Obama is President of the United States of America because he was willing to break out of a box. He didn't let people limit him. When I ran the first time, all the pundits said that, someone like me, in their stereotypical view, couldn't get elected till 2017 because Latinos were 22% of the electorate. And I said, well, why is that? Well, because racialized voting, and you won't have enough people to kind of get elected. And then, well, how did someone else do that? Well, they branched out and they went, well, I said, well, I'm going to branch out too. I've been to the homes of Jews with 3 ovens, 2 ovens and 1. I've been to the homes of African Americans and Asians and Koreans and every group, and I wouldn't let anyone put me in a box. Don't let them put you in a box. You have every right to be here, to blossom, to demonstrate and share your talent, and do it.
Thank you.
That's what I'd say.
Thank you.
Let's go down here.
Good evening. My
Good
name
evening.
is Auden Lawrence, and I will be asking tonight's question on behalf of the Twitter community.
The Twitter community.
Do you tweet?
The omnipresent.
Do you tweet?
Ryan used to tweet for me. I tweet from time to time, but mostly my staff did it. And I was always very clear. Look, I'll be honest, and not to knock anybody, but I've never understood how some people can tweet all day and run a country. I was running and I don't mean.
And still get elected senator from New Jersey.
Well, I didn't say it. I didn't understand. I didn't understand that because you got to run stuff, and you're going from one meeting to another, and so usually you have to say, tweet this, but you're not doing it yourself, and usually they would say, what do you think? Is this a good idea? And I would say, yeah. So I didn't always tweet, and I was always honest about it.
So the question is, how do you foresee both parties adapting to a growing Latino demographic, and will these changes be effective in securing
I'm
the
sorry,
vote?
say that.
How do you foresee both parties, Democrats and Republicans, adapting to a growing Latino demographic, and will these changes be effective in securing the vote?
I always describe us in LA as, the new Irish. I think people got to figure out, people are people, and I also got from my mom. In the 1950s, my mom had Jews, non-white Jews, Japanese Americans who lived in our community, African Americans, and looking back, even a gay couple, always over for dinner. We were very open in the 1950s, in an era when we were much more segregated. My mother always taught us to respect other people and that we were all, the same in most ways. And I would just say, understand that, Latinos want the same thing everybody else does. You want to be a part of the dream. You want a house, you want a family, you want your kids to have a better life. It's really, you want health care. It's really not any different than the Irish or the Italians or the Greeks or anybody else. It's still, for African Americans, they just want to be part of the dream. So I'd say treat them that way and don't take them for granted any more than you would take any other part of the electorate for granted. That's what I'd say.
Antonio, there are there are more Republican Hispanics elected statewide than Democrats. We've got 2 governors, Republican governors. There's also Republican congressmen, Hispanic congressmen like Raul Labrador from Idaho, the woman from Washington State, Herrera Bauer. So they are not in a box. I see few Democrat congresspeople who are not elected from congressional districts that are specifically drawn to represent a minority community. Why that irony with the party that wins 70% of the Hispanic vote?
A couple of reasons. I think particularly, I mean, there's also more governors and senators.
There's 2 Republican senators, 2 Republican governors. There's 1 Democrat Hispanic senator, Bob Menendez from New Jersey.
What happens is, I think, when we were with Ron Brownstein, and he was phenomenal. You had a great session today, and Ron talked about the changing demographics and, you know, the fact that with a growing Latino electorate and minority electorate, it's becoming more and more difficult for Republicans to get elected. I think what happens with Republican candidates and statewide elected officials is that they're able to get more of a sliver of the Latino vote, and then they get the Republican vote. And I think I would generally agree, because they're operating in a party in an atmosphere that's probably more hostile. They didn't have the luxury they had to mainstream faster than, you know, Democrats might want to. I mean, you know,
so
as an example.
Is that an unforeseen positive, you think?
Yeah, it's an unforeseen positive. I do think. I mean, look, when I ran, remember I was Speaker of the Assembly. That was another time when everybody said, "Well, that's not going to happen." And you know, I never let them limit me, and I think Democrat or Republican, you can't do that. And I think the Republicans do a fairly good job of not letting that be.
Can we go up there?
Good evening. My name is Rebecca, and I'm asking a question on behalf of the JFK Junior Forum. Looking forward, where do you see the Hispanic community 20 years from now? What does it look like in terms of median income, demographics, and education?
Well, if we educate, I mean, we got to educate them. I see a bright future. I mean, even with the world that we have now, they're the fastest growing new entrants into universities and colleges, but their percentage is still lower than every ethnic group. So the key is going to be, are we going to educate them? If we do, you're going to see them grow and in influence and power. But the key is educate them. So I can't answer that question without answering the threshold question, are we going to educate them? If we don't, we're going to continue in an environment 20 years from now that this university will look like it looks like today without, you know, the breadth of diversity. U.S. born, I mean, not U.S. born, but from this country, because you have a lot of international students, and that kind of helps the diversity here. But if you look at, you know, from the United States, the answer is we got to educate them. We just got to educate them. It's the most important issue. It's so important for all of us. Educated workers will keep our Social Security system alive, our Medicare system alive. Well, that's why I tell people, don't think I'm for immigration reform just because I'm a nice guy and for human rights and civil rights, and I've always been for immigrant rights. This is good. This is great for the economy. $1.5 trillion infusion into the U.S. economy. We're going to keep Social Security and Medicare solvent, and more so if they're educated. So the key to that question is, are we going to decide as a society that we're going to invest in our public schools in a way that we should again? Because remember, and I don't, you all much more informed than I, on that opportunity index that the OECD does, where are we now? 24th? The opportunity index basically says you started out here and your ability to start out here and get here, and how great is it for how many people? I think we're 20-something, 22nd.
There's a professor here at Harvard who
Who
specializes
probably
in
knows
this.
this.
There's Raj. He's a rock star professor, and you really need to get with him before you leave here.
I would love to do that, because that is the challenge for all of us, not just Latinos. We've got the public schools were the great equalizer in American society. They were the way that all the immigrants, every group, that was the way to get here. It's not working like it used to. And we all got to be concerned with that. Not talking ethnically, just all of us need to be concerned with that.
Let's go up there.
Hi, thank you. My name is Max Liebeskin. I'm a freshman at Harvard College, and I'm originally from New York City. And I was
Great city.
I agree.
Spent a lot of time there.
And I was in the New York City public school system for my entire life, from kindergarten to 12th grade. So I want to ask you a question about public schools. You were talking about the unions earlier, and it seems like today the unions tend to take a lot of heat. There are strikes every now and then. There was one in Chicago last year. But it does seem also that the unions definitely serve a purpose, especially in terms of attracting the best teachers and keeping them there and making sure they're not fired and things like that. So considering that you were involved in a major metropolitan school district in the United States, I'm wondering what you think the role of unions should be today and in the near future in American public education.
They should be at the forefront of lifting the standards of the profession. They should be at the forefront of improving our schools. They should be at the forefront of challenging society to invest in our teachers, in our schools, and our kids. And my hope is that we'll collaborate over time to do that. As I said earlier, I'm not somebody who in any way denigrates unions or doesn't believe in collective bargaining. I just think we have to be working together to improve the quality, particularly of our urban schools. And I've met a number, you are a growing anomaly when you look at, kids from urban schools coming to places like this. We got to change that. And I would love to partner, and ultimately we have to partner with them. I think we should pay teachers more, but then we've got to be able to evaluate them on their effectiveness. I don't believe that you should be able to make every decision based on seniority. I tell people, imagine if I had run a third term and said, vote for me, I've been here the longest. Well, you're all laughing, but imagine if I had done that. That's going to go real well, right? Yeah, you can't make every decision based on
You do
seniority.
realize you're in an institution where there's tenure.
Yeah, I know.
And you basically have to kill them in order to get rid of them.
But what was the genesis of that? That was Genesis, a lot of it came, when it really got where it is today, came out of that McCarthy era when they were going after professors who were questioning the government and science and everything else. And, should every teacher have tenure for life? Should they be able to re-earn it somehow? There's a middle ground. Some people say eliminate tenure completely. What about having to earn it every couple of years? What about having seniority, but not so, the private sector unions will tell you, they have seniority in the workplace. They don't have industry-wide seniority. I think there are a lot of rules there that just aren't working anymore. But to end, I do believe that ultimately we have to collaborate and work with them, because that's the toughest job there is. There's not a tougher job. You know, I mean, you're going, particularly in some neighborhoods where it's, you know, they're not coming ready to learn. They're hungry. They don't have a mom and dad. You know, you ask them, where are you living? Like in our schools. You ask them, where are you living? They don't have a home. I think we have the largest homeless population of students in the United States. I mean, you know, kids need a home. That's a tough job. So I recognize how hard it is to teach and how hard it is to kind of work with those kids. Now I take umbrage with those who tell me, well, Mayor, you don't understand. They're poor. They don't have a dad. Their parents didn't go to college. They don't speak the language. You're describing me. I mean, you know, I can read and write. You can't make excuses for the lack of success in our schools.
You know, you're giving Bleeding Heart liberals a bad name.
I love Bleeding Heart liberals.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah, I love them because they have a bleeding heart. We should all have a heart. You know, I tell people, I read a card once that said, someone gave me a card once that said, what is as important as knowledge, ask the mind, seeing and caring with the heart, answer the soul. I have a heart, and that's why I fight for these kids. You know, I cry at movies. You know, I cried at, what's the name of the movie, Waiting for Superman. No, I'm serious. I saw it 4 times or 5 times, and I cried every time. You remember? I was like, it's just, I mean, it just kills you that these kids with so much talent, you know, not making it. And you just, so I got a bleeding heart too. I just don't have tolerance for, you know, mediocrity.
Hello, my name's Christian Martinez. I am a first-year Master in Public Policy student.
Congrats.
And here also representing the Harvard Journal for Hispanic Policy. So on behalf of all of us, thank you again for being here.
Well, thank you for having
and
me.
just going with the trend of youth, homelessness, when you spoke about the importance of giving power to the parents, well, there are those who parents are not advocating. I'm particularly speaking about foster youth. I worked with an NGO in Orange County that particularly worked with foster youth, and what you actually saw was a noticeable migration of foster youth in the system, as well as those emancipating out of the system, moving to Orange County, or even changing their address simply to receive the services that Orange County had to offer, as well as the NGO services. We very much welcome them. But what did you do during your time in office to serve that community? What challenges did you face? What strides did you make? What challenges continue to exist? And where do you think there could be movement?
LA's a city and county both. The county, as you know, provides the health services. They asked me today in one of our sessions what I would do to change governance. I would make LA a city and county both so we can directly deal with issues like homelessness. You know, I built 2,400 units of permanent supportive housing for the homeless. That was in 8 years. In the 12 years before, they did 726. But I needed services, wrapped around services for those homeless, and I couldn't provide it because the county did, and they wanted to put all the services downtown and not throughout the county. The only place where I interacted with the issue of foster kids was through my schools. And there we tried to connect the county to a greater degree than probably other schools, but and maybe because we had a higher number or percentage of foster kids, you know, than other schools. But it was always difficult. And that's that whole, you know, trifurcated government that we have. You know, we didn't run the schools. I tried to run them anyways through, you know, we didn't run the county. You know, New York is a city and county both, and the mayor runs the schools. Chicago and San Francisco is a city and county both. Chicago runs the schools and is a city, doesn't run the county, but they're so powerful in the county that they actually drive it. We have 88 cities in the county. And even though we're the biggest city, they pretty much don't respond to the city. So it was very difficult. And I'm glad you raised that issue. And particularly that, foster kids are getting some services, but that emancipated between 18 and 24, my God, would it just fall in the black hole, the lack of services. And it's just sad because we shouldn't let, there's still children, young people go down that hole that way.
I think we got time for 2 more questions, so.
My name is John Clark Levin. I'm a first-year Master in Public Policy student here at the Kennedy School.
Congratulations.
Thank you. My question is this. Drawing on your experience in labor politics and also as mayor of a large, technologically progressive city, what do you see as the opportunities for government, especially city government and city public schools, to help the labor force adapt to changing technology and globalization?
Well, as a result of changes in the economy, working with your brain becomes more and more important. So number 1, educating our kids. Number 2, introducing technology to a much greater extent. Part of why our schools are doing better than the rest of the state is we've brought in blended learning, and we've brought in technology to a greater degree than others, but we're so strapped for cash that we've not done nearly what we should. And so I would just say that while I recognize that we need to prepare our kids for the 21st century and the technology requirements that come with that, I don't think any of our most of our public schools, particularly in the urban core, are doing enough. They're just so strapped. I think Hala Unified proposed giving an iPad to every kid, which I supported, but it fell on its face for now. Ultimately, I hope it moves forward. It should. It needs to. Smart boards. We're trying to put smart boards in our class. I mean, we're dealing with the basics, So I can't say we're doing enough is the answer.
Antonio, you were the, I'm remembering this as we're sitting here, you were the chair of the Democrat National Convention. And I heard you say oftentimes when you were doing opposition commentary, color commentary in Tampa, that the Republican platform sounded like it was from 1812, not 2012. Now, you had a pretty memorable moment when you tried to amend.
I said if you close your eyes and you listen to their agenda, you think it was 1812, not 2012. And it's, well, look, the self-deportation of 11 million people, not just abortion, but no abortion, including when that abortion is the result of rape or incest, no contraception. I mean, the list went on and on. It was no climate change.
All right. That's all good and fine. It's enough with that. But you were on the stage, national TV, gavel in hand, when you tried to amend the Democrat platform to include God and change the language on Israel, I think it was. Jerusalem. Think you had to do it 3 times, 4 times, take that vote? 3. Can you tell us a little bit of the backstory on that? And
I'll give you some backstory.
Yeah, give us something juicy.
I get a call around 3:30 in the afternoon. One of the Democratic operatives called me. And he said, the president's apoplectic. God in Jerusalem have been left off the platform. He wants them back in, and he wants them back in now. We need you to come in. Well, I'd been doing color commentary all day. I'm chairman of the Democratic Party convention. I'm just walking into the shower and, dressed as if you're just walking into the shower. And I said, well, I'll come in a minute, but I'm walking in the shower. I'll be right there. And I said, but have we whipped this? Whip means have you gone to all of the delegations, the state delegations, and got told everybody what we're going to do, and gotten them, to get behind it. And he said, well, we don't want to bring attention to it. And I said sarcastically, I know that a lot of people think I was made chairman of the Democratic Party for certain reasons, but let me explain something to you. I used to be Speaker of the California State Assembly. I never lost a vote. You don't put on the floor something like this without whipping it. He says, well, we don't want to alert the press and make a big issue of it. So I hang up the phone. I get a call from Jessica Yellen, our friend from CNN, who I've known since she was a kid. And she says, Mayor, there's a rumor. You're going to put on the floor an amendment to change the platform and put God and Jerusalem back in. And I said to her, Jessica, I don't know what you're talking about, and I hung up. I then called back this individual and I said, you said that you didn't want to alert the press, they already know. And he said, yes, I know. And he said, Jessica's called here too. So I said, hey, I'm giving you advice. You got to whip this. He says, I don't think that people will vote against God in Jerusalem. And I said, well, you want me to do it at 5 o'clock? There won't be people in the room. You just can't put it up to chance that way. So he said, well, sir, we don't want to do that. Come on in. I come in. It's a few minutes before 5. He comes to brief me, and I said, look, I really think we got to whip it. They said no. I said, fine. I said, then let me do this. When you're speaker, you get up on the floor, and to communicate to everybody that you want something, you'll say something like, the chair asked for an aye vote. I said, I want to say that. They said, no, that sounds undemocratic.
These things don't happen in the Republican convention.
And I said, undemocratic? Better than chaotic. I really suggest that I say the chair asked for an aye vote. He said no. And then finally, now 2 minutes before I walk onto the floor, I said, do you have the parliamentary language? And he says, no, we're typing it up. So I walked on that floor with no language, with nothing. And I called on Governor Strickland. He made the motion. I got a second. I then asked for the pleasure of the House. Forget the exact wording. And we all heard what we heard. I won't acknowledge it, but we all heard what we heard. And then I smiled and I said, let me do that again. And the second time, we all heard what we heard. And then I turn around to the parliamentarian, and she says, sir, it's your call. And I smile and I say, I know. I turn around, we all heard what we heard, and I said, the ayes have it. And then speaking of another colleague, I immediately leave the floor. I do know the rules, and I knew that someone had 10 minutes to object, so I left the floor. I go on CNN. Our friend Soledad O'Brien says, Mayor, what happened there? There were 2/3 vote to pass that amendment? And I said, sure there was, Soledad. She says, no, there wasn't. I was standing on the floor. And I said, well, that's nice to know, but you didn't have the prerogative. I did, and I exercised it. That was one of those days. I think one of your newspapers, the Miami Herald, described me as a
Deer caught in the headlights?
Yeah, deer caught in the headlights, that I was smiling the whole time while people were booing me. I knew what I did, and I knew I had to do it, and I'd do it again, because I do believe that God should have been in our platform, and I do believe that Jerusalem should have been inserted in that platform. And, I took a lot of ribbing. I thank Bill Clinton for saving my bacon, because I would have been the story the next day for weeks. But thankfully, Bill Clinton gave a speech of his lifetime, and you know, I got away with a little ridicule, but it's all good.
I was ridiculing him.
Yes, you were.
Anyways, over here.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Shirley Hidalgo. I graduated from the School of Education this past May, and I'm so happy to see you here in person because I recently read an article in which you were heralded as kind of a trendsetter, so to speak, for your decision-making in terms of your own life and your last name, and how you came to change that prior to your marriage. So I'm curious as to what was the conversations that kind of led up to that and the process behind that, and how you feel about being sort of putting a first down in that arena.
I grew up in the civil rights movement. I believe strongly in
Well, but tell them the background, because I'm not sure everybody knows.
I put two names together back 20 some odd years ago.
You were Antonio Villar.
Villar, and everybody anglicized it, so it was Antonio Villar. And actually, a lot of people would call me Tony, so it was Tony Villar. You know, it was like it was a very different name. And
That's like a good soap opera name.
yeah, it was a good soap opera. Well, there's a guy in General Hospital everybody say I look like or whatever. And
Look, at least it wasn't Carlos Danger.
yeah, right. So yeah, I just felt strongly that, you know, I was at a party one day and it was a group of people and someone asked my ex-wife if she was going to change her name, and she said she was, and I said, and then they asked me, well, what about you? And I said, well, I thought she wasn't going to, and I said, well, if you're going to change your name, I'm going to change my name too. And one thing led to another, and we blended a whole long name that nobody can pronounce. And when I ran for office in 1994, my consultant said to change my name back. And actually they said I should go by Anthony. And I told them they needed to go get another job. You are who you are. And I've kept the name even though I've divorced because it is who I am now. And I did it because I had a respect for the notion that when you come together like that, you know, you're one.
So we've got, I think, 2 more students. You want to take those questions, or are we, that was 7:10?
We'll take one more.
Okay.
Two more, I guess.
Hi.
Two people standing up.
Hi. Good evening, and thank you for coming tonight. Okay. My name is Ben. I'm a junior at the college, and I'm also a resident of Thousand Oaks. So, I guess
Thousand Oaks.
Quasi-LA resident.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, so my question relates to kind of the narrative of activist mayors, especially on the national and the international stages, and it's definitely a narrative that I think your work and like mayors like Mayor Bloomberg have contributed to. And the question is this: what tools or advantages do you feel mayors have on these issues relative to national and state and national actors? And how do you see this role kind of changing in coming years, and where do you hope it'll be?
Well, one, we're closer to people. You know, I was mayor of the second largest city in the country. I'd be sitting at a restaurant, at a baseball game. I'll be in the market, and people come right up to you and tell you, hey, when are you going to fix that pothole? When are you going to trim my trees? They didn't pick up my trash today. They left the trash all over the street. I mean, you touch real people and they touch you, sometimes literally. I mean, you know, and so I'd say we're closer to people. They trust us more. What happens once you're mayor, you're in a less hyper-partisan kind of environment. You got to work with a broad cross-section of people. You know you get elected based on what you do, not what you say. So while you might have views and you may be able to communicate them, you know ultimately you get judged by whether you did what you said you were going to do. The Congress doesn't have that kind of accountability. They just get to espouse their views, frankly, in a way different from mayors and governors to a lesser extent, because state capitals tend to be very partisan as well. But I think when you look at the country, I mean, let me give you all like an example. New York, $1.2 trillion economy, LA, an $800 billion economy, Chicago, about a $600 billion economy. If you took the three metropolitan areas, we have an economy the size of France. If you took the top 10 metropolitan areas, our economy is a $5 trillion economy. I don't have to tell you, the only two countries that have a larger economy are the United States and China. As America's cities go, so go the nation. We're 89% of the GDP of the nation. The top 10 is a third, of the GDP. They have a lot they can learn from us. I mean, I was president of the Conference of Mayors. We unanimously, and we're 70-30 as far as Democrat, Republican, we unanimously supported immigration reform. We unanimously have taken on, we've supported charters, high-performing ones. We've supported, addressing this issue, maybe not eliminating it, but addressing the issue of seniority and tenure. We've taken on entitlements. We got behind Simpson Bowles. We've had to do pension reform. The difference between us is that I tell people, because I used to be speaker, I tell people, the federal government, when they're in a crisis, they get to lift the debt limit. They get to print more money. States, when they're in a crisis, they balance their budgets on the backs of cities, counties, and school districts. We're the only one that actually have to balance a budget. And so that has a tempering effect on you. I joke, when you become mayor or a governor or a president for that matter, and you have to sign the check on the front, tempers you a bit. You're not just signing it on the back. You got to look at how much revenues you're getting, what you're spending. I think they could learn a lot from us. And they don't seem, neither party, Republicans more, but neither party responds to mayors, and particularly the mayors of the large metropolitan. We can get a meeting, but we don't get much else. And that is a mistake. It's not just the United States. You look at America, Copenhagen. We were at Copenhagen, the follow-up to Kyoto. And I don't know if you know, 1,200 mayors signed on to Kyoto in the United States. My city, I signed on in July of 2005. Kyoto says you reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 7% of 1990 levels by 2012, right? Most of you know that, right? We're at 28%, the #1 American city. They can learn from that. New York, Chicago, San Francisco, we're all beyond the Kyoto levels. They can learn from that. They can learn from, well, around the world, that's also true. London, Berlin, the #1 city reducing carbon emissions is Berlin and Copenhagen at 40, then I think London, and then Toronto, and then LA. But those countries can learn from us. But, particularly in the United States, they don't pay much attention to Bloomberg, to Daley, to Rahm now, to Menino, to to Garcetti, to any of us. And they can learn a lot from us. Because that's actually, the cities are actually places where things are working.
Okay, so our last question.
Mayor, I'm very excited you're here. I'm from Los Angeles as well.
Where'd you go to school?
Well, I went to a few schools. I went to Hooper, I went to Edison Junior High, I went to Bell High School, and I'm getting my doctorate here in educational leadership.
Congratulations.
And I wish you would have brought the Dodgers with you, but
well, I was saying to my girlfriend who's from Boston, I said, my dream is a Dodger Red Sox game, because my son loves the Red Sox, and they're my second favorite team because they beat the Yankees from time to time. And I'm a Dodger fan. But we didn't make it.
My question is about something we haven't heard from today. You mentioned that in California, we're about 47th in the nation, or at least were in spending for schools, for education. Can you talk a little bit about prisons? And in particular, In California, if I understand this correctly, since 1980, we've built 23 prisons and one UC Merced. And what does that say for our state and for our country in terms of our economic priorities when we're 47th in spending in schools, but we're spending so much on prisons and locking people up? And you mentioned that there's not a lot of us here. I happen to be the first Mexican immigrant in this doctoral program, so it's a little bit of a challenging journey. But if I went to UC Chino or Soledad or San Quintin, we're the majority. And so it's a very real question with real lives at stake that I'd love to get your take on.
Yeah, and I actually took on prison building. You know, I was president of the ACLU. I was against the death penalty. I took on prison building in California. I saw the trend with 3 strikes, you're out. And I opposed 3 strikes, you're out when I knew it was going to pass overwhelmingly, and I was on the ballot for the first time. I also opposed 187, which was on the ballot, the anti-immigrant initiative. I opposed both of them, was against the death penalty, president of the ACLU, and survived. So I immediately took on the issue of prison building, and I said, look, we have all these people who are dying, who are geriatrics, 80 years old, 70 years old. They're in beds. What are they still doing in prison? If we let them out, the federal government will have to take care of them because of Medi-Cal, so they'll be off of our budget. It took me 3 years, and they completely watered down the compassionate release bill till it was a bare facsimile thereof of what I initially proposed. They're now, Mississippi and Texas are now starting to realize we need to move in that direction. I then tried to fix Prop 3 strikes. I was one of the leaders who said, hey, look, let's make that 3rd felony a serious felony here, a violent felony, not, you know, stealing a pizza. We're just putting all these people in prison, and the cost of that is astronomical. And you are right when you say that there's a direct correlation between the 1980s and beginning of the 90s, particularly after 3 strikes, the amount of spending for education, institutions of higher learning, and the amount of spending for prisons. Everybody, what if I told you that in America today, the freest country in the world, we incarcerate more people per capita and in absolute numbers than, as I understand it, any country in the world? That means South Africa, that means Russia, that means China. That is a broken paradigm. And then when you add on top of that the situation where we increasingly have more folks of color in prisons than an institution of higher learning, this isn't healthy for us. So I think we need to get back to being smart on fighting crime. You're looking at a guy who, I mean, we didn't talk about the things we did, but while I was mayor, homicides and violent crime went down more than 40%. But we grew community policing. We had as our mantra constitutional policing, and we have some of the most innovative prevention and intervention programs when it comes to gangs in the country, because we were the gang capital of the United States of America. So I think it says a lot about our priorities that we're in the state. I hope that our values are such that we'll understand that it makes more sense to invest in kids early than have to spend the amounts of money that we spend. I think we can learn, it's interesting enough, coming primarily from the fiscal end, fiscally conservative end. Right now, Mississippi and Texas are leading the way. And I mean, they were leading the way in sending people to prison, and then we followed. My joke used to be when they would put these unconstitutional bills on and I would vote against them. My joke used to be, do we have to make the standard Mississippi? Well, it's actually, and go, I mean, we were talking in the 1990s, we were talking about the death penalty for 12 and 14-year-olds. And I'd have to get up and say, excuse me, the gentleman from the other side of the aisle, can you tell me how many countries do that? And then he'd have to, I'd say, well, I can tell you, there are 3. I mean, is that where we want to be? So I think we've got to be innovative. We've got to give people a shot. You know, once you've served your time, you know, if you have a felony and you serve your time, you can never vote again. I mean, after you served your time, you ought to be able to integrate. We ought to be able to have a job. We should have reentry programs. We ought to have reentry programs, rehabilitation programs. We ought to reward people changing their lives. And those of us who are God-fearing, I started out with saying, you know, I believe in God, you know, ought to believe in redemption. God of love is about redemption. And you know, we have such a punitive view toward crime and punishment, and it's not smart. Because the recidivism rate in California and all these other, it's like 78%. That means after they serve their 20 years, they come back. So maybe we ought to try something smarter.
Talking about rehabilitation, let me ask you a quick political question. Do you see any potential 2016 candidates on the Republican side who could rehabilitate the Republican Party with Latinos?
I think the best candidate there is Jeb. And not because I, you know, I mean, agree with him, but, you know, he doesn't have that hard rhetoric. He supports comprehensive immigration reform. He's comfortable in his skin. You know, his family he's got a blended family. You know, I think he has the possibility, but that won't happen if they don't pass immigration reform and they, you know, keep this if the party overall continues this demonization of immigrants.
What about the 2 Hispanics that are mentioned right now as potential 2016 candidates, Cruz and Rubio?
I think Marco has a better shot than Cruz.
I agree. And then, final question. You got another one in you? You got another election, another campaign in you? You've got the itch still?
You know, I didn't. I didn't have it. You know, I've been mayor for 8 years, council member for 2, majority whip, majority leader and speaker for 6 years. It's been 16 out of the last 20 years. I've had some of the toughest campaigns. I want some, I mean, the reason why I'm here, and I want to thank you all for having me, I want some time to reflect. I want some time to drill down deep about the path ahead for my state, for our country, for the world. And I want to spend, you know, I'm going to, I think it was announced today, so I could say it. I'm going to chair, I'm a senior fellow at the Bipartisan Policy Center, not because I've gone to the other side, but just because I think things have to work, and we have to model civility and compromise and statesmanship and practicality. I have just been announced that I'm going to chair the Center for the Restoration of the California Dream at USC. I'm a Bruin, so this was a big decision and a big announcement. And yeah, I want to be around.
That sounds like a pretty good platform to stay relevant in California.
Well, yes, but I want to be around deep thinkers who will help me think through the path ahead. Because I could tell you this, I don't intend on ever running again if I can't be transformative. I don't want to tinker around the edges. I was, I think, an effective mayor, not a great one. The next time around, I want to be transformative. And if I can't be transformative, I'll let someone else do it.
That was the biggest political non-answer I've heard in a long time.
No, it wasn't a non-answer. You also said that it sounded like a good platform to you. I clearly am the reason why I want to reflect, I want to regenerate, I want to see if I'm ready. But I may not be, just like Jeb. I mean, listen, you asked about Jeb. The question for Jeb is, does he still...
No. I asked who would be
Yeah.
the best to rehabilitate. You said Jeb.
Yeah, but Jeb, the question for Jeb is going to be, does he have it in the valley? Does he really want to do this? And that'll be the question for me too, because the one thing, if anybody's watched my campaigns over the years, I run hard. I am indefatigable. You need energy, you need heart, you need to be inspired to do that. I know how difficult, and then to run for California, it's like it's a 2-year campaign, and it's brutal. It's brutal. And because if I did it, I wouldn't do it like they're doing it now, where it's all TV. I'm knocking on doors. I'm putting on my 5-gallon hat and my cowboy boots, and I'm going to those picnics and barbecues, and I'm going to touch people, because I believe that politics,
It's a big state, buddy.
when reduced to its simplest component, is about people. We're not university professors talking in the abstract. You're practical. You roll up your sleeve. You're with people. So if I campaigned, it's going to be campaigning old-fashioned style.
All right, so I'm going to let you reflect for a year or two, then I'm going to ask you again.
You can do that.
Stay tuned. Thank you very much.